Hi, everyone. Welcome back for Preparing for the Flood, How to Load Test to Prepare Your WordPress Site for a Viral Event with Tony Lee. Tony is a WP Engine Senior Solutions Engineer. He loves discovering interesting, innovative technology and learning how it can help transform the digital experience, all while creating ways for customers to win online. He is also recovering from a Topo Chico addiction. I love WP Engine, so I'm excited to have Tony here today. Tony, take it away. And if you have any questions, please write them in the chat, and I will ask them at the end of Tony's presentation.
Cool, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, the Topo Chico addiction is real, so it's an ongoing thing. So today we're going to talk about preparing for the flood being the surge of traffic that you might be getting at any point in time. That could be seasonal, that could be a major event that happens, or that could be unexpected also. So I'm happy to be here and coming from you guys from Austin, Texas. Cool. So in this session, we're going to talk about what is a load test, when and why you should load test, best practices, different types of tests, KPIs, tools. So a little bit of the philosophy of load testing, and then we'll dive into what you should do in a short time frame where something is happening, it's unexpected, and you aren't quite ready to do a load test. So we'll talk about some of the next steps. A little bit about myself. And Sarah already mentioned it, but I'm a solutions engineer at WP Engine. I'm also a WordPress evangelist. This is me on top of Enchanted Rock, which is one of the tallest rocks in the world. And it's super windy. I don't know why I'm wearing shorts because it's really cold. But I'm really happy to be on top here because it's a bit of a climb. Some fun facts. I was in a Funny or Die sketch that was featured on Tosh.0. It's called Gay Kicks. Probably could Google it. I also attended my first 10-day silent meditation retreat, which was crazy. So no talking, no writing, no eye contact or anything like that. Then I also enjoy barefoot running, which is something I did today. Okay, so why is this topic important? Okay, so let's play a little bit of imagination and put ourselves in a scenario where we own a t-shirt company, right? So you have good style, good taste, and you are wanting to create this thing, and this is one of your passions, your idea. You put it out there, and you have a t-shirt company, and it's going well. You're making some sales, generating some revenue, and it's all good. However, one day you wake up in the morning and you roll out of bed, you pick up your phone, you check Instagram, and what do you see? You see Beyonce wearing your shirt, standing right next to Jay-Z, and you're tagged in the photo because someone's like, whoa, that's your shirt. What happens next, right? It's a frenzy. All of a sudden, everyone wants to go on your site and purchase your shirts. And so it just wreaks havoc. And you're like, oh, this is a good problem. This is awesome. Unfortunately, your site goes down. And that's a problem, right? You can't even sell your inventory because your site isn't even up to sell it. And this is something that can happen not only from a celebrity endorsement, right? And maybe wherever you are in the world, it could be maybe your favorite Hollywood actress or a politician, or you're featured on or you're on Black Friday, or you have a sale on Black Friday, I should say, or you're featured on Ellen, or pitching to the biggest entrepreneurs in the world during Shark Tank. Then this is a lot of traffic that you'll be getting, right? And during this time also, during the quarantine, a lot of people are, not going out, they're not doing a lot of stuff. So what happens? Actually, a lot of traffic is the internet is pretty much experiencing a lot of traffic and a lot of visitors. So you're seeing a trend right now, and here's some headlines of some worst case scenarios that happened where some testing probably wasn't done, and applications are just trying to work to keep their site up, especially during this surge, right? This global surge in traffic. And we've seen it at WP Engine also. We've seen a lot of customers come in and they've been experiencing above average and significantly larger amounts of traffic. And they're wondering, how do we support this long term? Because it might be something that they want to capitalize on. Okay, and next, this is something that we actually get a lot, which is how much traffic can my site handle, right? So you got something you're on the big stage, whether you're featured on a TV show or something like that. This is a pretty critical moment. So this is something that I get a lot, and typically the answer that I provide is it really depends. Really depends on a ton of factors. However, there's two major factors when it comes to preparing for large amounts of traffic. One of them being infrastructure, and the second being application code, which is your WordPress site. So with the infrastructure, you want to make sure that you have best in breed technology. You're partnering with the infrastructure providers like Google or AWS, having redundancy in place, auto scaling, high availability if necessary. So just making sure that you have the next gen kind of servers with enough resources also. And then from the WordPress side of things, you want to make sure that you're following best practices. Make sure that the site is really fast and optimized and is really cacheable. So it's kind of the brawn versus brain kind of thing, where if you have a lot of muscle, right, then you're competing against brain intelligence. Intelligence is always going to win. So transitioning that to a website, if you have the best infrastructure in the world and an unoptimized WordPress site, that infrastructure is only going to help alleviate some of the problems, but it's not going to help solve the root cause, which could be code base. So what is a load test? Well, I'm sure everyone knows what a speed test is. So you can go to webpage test.org or GTmetrix and visit a site, and you get like a response time for that one visit. A load test goes above and beyond what a speed test is, right? It's not just a chapter, it's the whole story. So really showing you how much traffic your site can actually handle, but also how long does it take for the site to load upon heavy load when you're getting a large amount of traffic, not just one visit, but hundreds, thousands of concurrent users all visiting the site at the same time. So by definition, a load test is the process of putting demand on a system. It's typically performed to simulate peak traffic. So peak traffic being whatever you think your highest number of concurrency might be. And basically what you're trying to answer is, how does the site perform under heavy load? Pardon the sniffles, by the way. I'm going through some sinuses. So why should you load test? Well, downtime is expensive and every minute counts. So according to BlazeMeter, 1 minute of downtime during Black Friday costs an organization $4,700 on average. That's huge. Gartner cites around the same amount, $5,600 per minute. And in the US alone, this is a stat back in 2018, Amazon is estimated to have lost $72.4 million in revenue based on 63 minutes of downtime. So that's about $1.15 million of lost revenue per minute. That's huge. And obviously these are big stages, and your site probably isn't going to be at that point, or maybe it will, but even if, a minute of downtime equates to $500, $1,000, 2,000, then that's still a lot of money that you could be making, right? And you should be capitalizing on. So how do we reduce that amount of risk so you can maximize this opportunity that you might have? Second reason why you should load test, users don't have time. So if you see here in this chart, this is a Pingdom collecting a ton of data from their sites. And you can see here in the blue is the amount of the percentage of the bounce rate. And once you start hitting about 3 or 4 seconds, the bounce rate starts increasing significantly. So if your site is slow, people aren't going to wait. And they might go to a competitor's site if they're looking for high value content, or they're about to purchase a product and it's taking too long. Maybe they'll be like, okay, well, I'm gonna go check on it later, and that's a lost opportunity, because how whenever you purchase a product, a lot of it is probably emotional. So you're losing different ways you can monetize on the site. Okay, so best practices. Let's go into a little bit of the philosophy. So there's a saying in the load testing space that you should test early and test often. So load testing is an iterative process. It's not just a one and done kind of thing. It's you test and then you see what the results are, you tune the site, you optimize it, and then you test again. So the more time that you have to fix any of the bugs or address any of the bottlenecks in the beginning, early on, then you'll be able to tackle a lot of the more bigger issues that happen whenever you're getting a higher magnitude of traffic or load. So, it's always best if you're doing a plugin update or a theme update to do small incremental performance tests just to see how that might impact your user base. And then once you do all the small fixes, then you can move over to larger volumes of concurrent users that you can test with that can present more of a real life scenario for your site. So just a note, whenever you do some small scale testing, you might say, hey, this is really great. My site is performing really well. However, it might not be until you start throwing a ton of traffic to the site where they'll start showing up you might start seeing more and more issues, right? And so high traffic sites could perform differently whenever, or I should say, if the site is, experiencing small traffic and it's performing well, it could behave very differently whenever it gets a lot more traffic. Next, don't test on production unless you really, really have to. Now, this whole thing it's controversial in the space, because you'll see people say, hey, like, you can totally test on production. And again, it just goes back to the context of your business. So if you're an international business with a lot of visits and a presence that's global, then it might not make sense to test your production site. And so what's the next best option? It's to spin up a non-production environment. We could call this a dev server or dev environment that's like for like of your production. So if you have, let's say, an AWS cluster, right, with load balancer and web node, storage, database layer, you want to spin up the same thing that's not serving live traffic, cake on all of the other integrations, like if you have Cloudflare, if you have CDN, like add all of the things so it's an exact replica of your live site. And then you can actually throw the traffic at the dev site to get the most accurate results as possible. Of course, maybe that's not realistic. So if that's the case, just test production during off business hours, whatever that might be for your shop. Right on. Don't test on a shared environment. I think it goes without saying, but at any point in time, if you are testing on a shared environment, the health of that environment will fluctuate, right? So you check at 9 a.m. and the site's doing well, and then 5 minutes later, the environment is really about to crash. So you don't really have a lot of control with a shared environment. There's limitations to scale. And if you are load testing, there's probably going to be, and especially if you're using a managed platform, uh, there might be a security feature that blocks the source IP address where the load testing is coming from. Also, there's a noisy neighbor effect, which you don't want to make your other customers mad. And then there might be some rate limiting in place also. So basically, if you do a load test here, you might be wasting your money and time in doing something that might not really lead to realistic or reliable results here. Okay, so you know what a load test is. You know why you should load test. Now, what kind of load test should you do? Well, there's a ton of different types of tests out there, and here are the three most common. One is the spike test, which is how does your system, so your infrastructure and your site, respond to a sudden increase in load, right? So it's a sudden surge and then a sudden decrease. If it's a stress test is basically trying to help you understand where is the breaking point of the site. So if you're getting a lot of traffic, at what concurrent user number is my site going to break down? And that could be a number of different events. A flash sale is something that you can do a stress test in order to prepare for a flash sale, and then a soak test. So how does the system respond to high load over time? So maybe you're doing something like preparing for Black Friday, and it's taking, your sale is probably going to last for longer than an hour, right? Because it's a whole day ordeal. So it might be that you're testing for, 4 hours. So how does the system, respond to resource usage over a longer period? If I were to start and you were preparing for a load test just to understand capacity, I would go with a stress test. And the stress test, again, will show you where the breaking point is. Now you see how the graph stair steps. The blue is the number of concurrent users. So if you started at 0 on the bottom left there, right, and then you move up, maybe maybe you're going in increments of 10. So it might be like, okay, well, I'm going to increase my user number to 10, and then to 20 users, and then to 30 users. There's kind of a method to the madness, which is you should stair step the number of users and ramp it up, because if you went from 0 to 5,000 users and the site goes down, then okay, well, my site can't handle 5,000 users. It's like, great, cool story, but I don't know at what point or what number of users it actually failed at. So that's why you stair step. Okay, so it's worth noting that there are some really good open source tools in the space. One of them is JMeter. JMeter is an open source load testing service. It's also compatible with Windows, Linux, Mac, and it's one of the most established tools. So I just want to highlight that and kind of give a nod to Apache JMeter. However, it can really be a high learning curve in order to learn Apache JMeter, as with any open source technology, right? So something you can use is a load testing platform, something like BlazeMeter or our artillery.io, Load Ninja, in order to take advantage of the easy to use interface and the usability of a load testing platform which some of these tools like BlazeMeter are actually still compatible with an open source technology like JMeter also. So you can have the robustness of JMeter and the usability of something like BlazeMeter too. Okay, so if we're creating a scenario, this is really the next step. You've chosen what tool and what platform you're going to use. Now, this is where you want to loop in your marketing team. If you're the technical team here, and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, where do I start? The best thing to do is go in and lean on your marketing intelligence to understand, okay, these are how the users are behaving on the site. So maybe you know that there's a high bounce rate, maybe a small conversion rate, and you understand where the users in between lie and what they're mostly engaging in when it comes to your storefront or your publication site, right? Other things that you can pull from marketing intelligence is where are your users coming from? Are they coming from, just the US, or maybe in Europe, or perhaps all around the world, in Australia, Japan? So whenever you design the test, you can actually define the source traffic to come from those countries also. Then percentage of web versus mobile users, and when do they drop off? Cool. So once you understand what the user journey looks like, you can get a pen and paper, or you can do it the high-tech way via Word doc or Google Doc, and create a user flow. So here's an example of 5 different user flows. This is typically recommended about 3 or 5 different ways that a user might interact with your site, right? And then so you develop these personas, and the percentage on the right there is the frequency or the probability of that happening on your website based on your marketing metrics. So you can see here on the bottom, the user flow is actually showing someone actually adding a product to the cart and then completely checking out. So that's the conversion rate right there, which is 1%. I've seen users or customers design load testing where 100% of the user flow is going to be a conversion. So they're buying a product or registering. I don't know any business that has 100% conversion rate from their site. And so, if you do that, your load test isn't going to be accurate. It's not going to show the most reliable results. And if that happens, then, and you go by those results, you're going to make malinformed decisions for your business. So vice versa, most realistic tests, reliable results, very accurate results, and then you can make more informed decisions for your business coming up to that event, or whether it's expected or unexpected. Cool. How do you calculate concurrent users? Well, if you've already done this event before, you go into Google Analytics and you can pull these metrics from GA. And here's another photo to show you here. So you can pull those metrics out, and then you divide it by 3,600. And then you'll have a number of what your concurrent users might be. Whenever you do the test, I would probably go 120% of that value. So if you have, your max currency is like 100 users, just for sake of math here, then you want to test 120 users in order to make sure that you do the load test, and you're allocating a lot of concurrent users, which you have to pay for most of the time. And if the test is successful, that's great, but you don't know when it failed. And so the cool thing about load testing is you're trying to break down your site, right? At least to start off. And so that's a really fun part of it. Okay. So you've designed your user flows. Now you're going into the fun part, which is creating the script. So each user flow, and you saw 5, you would basically replicate all of those actions through some kind of script recording tool. And this is BlazeMeter's Chrome extension. You can download it, and it's really easy to use. And it's simple as clicking play and record, clicking and replicating what the user is doing on the site. Even the wait time, the extension is smart enough to account for that as well. And then you hit stop, and then you can replay it just to see how the script is actually working. And then after that, you can import it automatically into the BlazeMeter platform or whatever load testing platform you're using in order to add it to the actual test scenario. So you have 5 user flows, you would create 5 user scripts. And so the user scripts are basically going to feed that load test in order to make it functional and replicate all of the things that you are planning to, you're planning your customers to do on your site at that time. Okay. So once you create the script, there might be a little bit more complexity involved. You might have to add some dummy data to log into a site, for example. And if you are looking for more complexity, more robustness, you can always upload the script that you created through the Chrome extension into JMeter's desktop application like this, and then do whatever you need to do. I will note again that it does take a bit of a learning curve to understand how to use desktop JMeter's application. And that's okay, because there's a lot of resources out there to show you as well if you have the time and resources to do that. And I'll show you in the end as well some of the list of resources that I have. Okay, so defining KPIs. This is really important because you want to make sure that you know what your team cares about the most whenever completing the test. So maybe it's response time, maybe it's error rates, peak requests per second, dynamic requests. So whatever you guys are prioritizing, you want to make sure that you define the KPIs, and so you're getting the most out of your test. What monitoring tools should you use? Okay, so there's several monitoring tools, really great ones that are native to the load testing platform. So the one I like to use is BlazeMeter. It's very intuitive when it comes to graphs, metrics, all in a neat dashboard. Then you also have the application performance monitoring. So something I like to use is New Relic APM. And this is showing you here. So this is a load test that I've done previously, and you can see where the load test starts. So if you look at in the beginning where it starts to peak up significantly, right? So baseline was around 250 milliseconds for a web transaction. Once I started the load test, I threw about 5,000 concurrent users at it, ramping up. And then you can see how it just significantly increased to about 1,400 milliseconds. So that's a huge jump. And that's where, from my side, I can now dig in to see, okay, well, where was the bottleneck, right? And so in New Relic, you can see that a lot of it was PHP and a lot of it was Memcache. So those would be the areas that I dig into. And then, of course, you have the external uptime monitoring tool. So this is just nice to have in case your site completely goes down. So it's really making sure that you are monitoring the availability of your site. And so you have automatic notifications when your site does go down. This is just good to have in general, not just for a load test. Okay, so with all of that said, what's the tipping point? This is basically, what the breaking point is. And this really, again, is kind of like the question, how much traffic can my site actually handle, right? So this is an image that I pulled from BlazeMeter that shows here in the blue, you see the number of users in the number of requests that are being processed by the system. So you can see here in the green, the number of requests that are being processed starts to slow down and plateaus around, I would say, 85 virtual users. And so what's happening there? Basically, the graph is showing that, hey, the system's saying, I can't really handle any more requests, right? Or else I'm going to crash and vomit because it's just too much at the moment. So if I was going to say where the tipping point is, it would be at the moment where it starts plateauing, which is 85 virtual users. And whatever platform you're using, it might not be as perfectly round as this, but again, once you start using these types of tools, you'll start understanding the metrics and you can see some kind of trend here. Also, the tipping point is usually whenever you start seeing slower response times, right? Similar to what was shown in new Relic APM just a minute ago. And also your 50x error. So you might see an increase in 504 errors or 502 errors, which means that really performance is being compromised because of the heavy load. Okay, so what to do in a short time frame. I know we went really high level when it came to going over a lot of the load testing process. And if you are looking for a more detailed nitty gritty, like step-by-step how to set things up, then I did write a white paper on this, and it's also linked in the slides at the end here that you're more than welcome to dive into. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me as well at tony.le@wpengine.com. And so what should you do whenever something is about to happen, right? And you're not expecting it and you're like, oh no, this is about to happen tomorrow. And I just don't have time to optimize the site or do a load test. What do? Well, what you can do is if you're not doing it yourself, meaning that you're managing the infrastructure yourself via Google or AWS or Azure or whatever, but maybe you're using a managed platform, right? And if that's the case, then reach out to them and see if they can help you. They might be able to do a health analysis of the site and the environment to understand where you might be in terms of capacity during the baseline. And then what might happen is, I would say, if it is a significant jump in traffic that you're expecting, probably 8 times, 9 times out of 10, that managed service is going to ask you to increase the infrastructure and the resources of your environment. So basically scaling up or scaling horizontally or outwards to just provide more resources to handle that traffic. Note that that is going to cost money in order to upgrade temporarily. However, you and your team are going to want to assess if that is something that is going to be, critical for your business as an investment. So also, it's helpful just to notify your support team as well, because maybe someone can be assigned a support technician, can monitor the site during the event itself and notify you every 30 minutes to an hour of, hey, like, here's your server load and you're doing okay, or your server load is reaching a threshold where we should probably upgrade. So that's always nice, just to be proactive and communicate that. And then next, perform any site optimizations. So This is something that the support team can also provide and share with you. There might be a whole list, and this is, by the way, is shared in the white paper also. There could be a whole list of things that you can do, from converting your database tables from MyISAM to InnoDB, to increasing your cache expiration date. Maybe your cache is resetting every 10 minutes, where you can extend that to a couple hours. So that could possibly help. And then, there's other things that you can do also, such as disabling certain functionality. If you're using WooCommerce and you're using something like cart fragments, with cart fragments basically updates the upper right-hand corner of your the number of products you have in your cart upon every page load. And maybe that's just not realistic, and you want to disable that temporarily. So there's a ton of different things that you can do, just whatever fits for what you guys need right now, what's best for the business. Okay. And then last but not least, something I want to recommend is Qt. Qt, or any other tool similar to Qt, is a virtual online waiting room, which basically preserves your users that are visiting your site whenever you're at capacity. So it gives you your number in line, so what position you're in, the number of users ahead of you, and then the amount of time that you might have to wait. Why is this so cool and helpful? Well, if you look at a site that you want to go on, right? I used to be a big sneakerhead, and I would go to these websites to buy Yeezys. And what happens? Well, the site's just not responsive. And if that's the case, then what's the whole point in me checking 5 or 10 minutes from now? That just, there's no guarantee that I'll be able to purchase a product. So Qt is nice because it can, again, preserve those users, right? Line them up very neatly and say, okay, just wait in line and you'll get your turn. So, and it probably makes for a better user experience than the site going down and it's completely unresponsive. So that's Qt. And any questions? And before I dive into questions, here's the resources I was saying: the white paper, preparing for peak traffic. There's also a link to Qt. Blaze Runner is a professional service that's associated with BlazeMeter, where maybe you don't have time to do a load test, but you want to hire professionals to do it. Blaze Runner is a good way to go. And then this is something that I should note. Whenever you're testing an e-commerce site like WooCommerce, this is not said enough in the space, but it can be very difficult. The reason why is that you have to use dummy data and then dummy credit card information in order to make sure that you go through the entire checkout process. So a lot of times whenever I see someone testing WooCommerce, it's usually go in, look at a product, and then you're checking out, and at the checkout point, they just bounce, right? So that's only telling half the story. But if you're talking about the entire conversion, then you want to actually go through, purchase the product, and in the back end, that does stuff, right? It writes to the database, it orders, creates some order tables and information, customer information into the database. So there's a couple of recommendations that I have. There's Load Impact, has a helpful resource and a guide to show you how to do that. And then there's also an open source tool called From Coded Commerce, which taps into WooCommerce REST API in order to create orders as well. So different ways. I haven't tested any of these. If you have, please let me know and see how it is. I'm really curious. And then last but not least, Apache JMeter Academy, which I think has been renamed to BlazeMeter Academy, is a helpful resource also if you're wanting to learn more about JMeter's open source platform and how you can set up load tests more robustly. So yeah, any questions?
Thank you so much, Tony. Let me see what we have in the chat here. First question from Joe. What's the biggest panic move most people make, in your opinion, after a viral event?
After a viral event, well, I think there's a panic move before the viral event, and then I'll mention after also. So before, well, sometimes they just say, hey, we're not going to upgrade or scale. We're just going to stay where we're at. And that's not a good idea, because your site might go down, right? So it's helpful to understand that if you're partnering with a service that's going to provide a lot of good insight, and whoever it is, that there's a trust there, and you should probably listen to them, because just last week alone, I saw a business who was featured on the Today Show who went down during the show itself. And so, the panic happens when the site goes down too, right? So that's during, and then is there panic after? Yeah, I think the panic after is like, okay, should we move to another environment? Should we move off to a different service? And I think it's just a matter of just really looking at it objectively and seeing how could I have prevented this, and what could I do next time in order to really prepare myself for the event.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what do you think is the easiest thing that people can do to prepare themselves for an eventual deluge?
What was that last part?
What's the easiest thing that people can do to prepare themselves?
What's the easiest thing? So being proactive, that's probably going to be much, much easier than being reactive. I know this sounds very philosophical right now, but being proactive and making sure that you're doing the right things beforehand, leaning on help. There's a ton of resources out there, so there's an abundance of ways that you can really help improve your site way before the actual point where it's like, okay, now it's like, oh shoot, I gotta procrastinate, right? So just do a lot of things. Just if you're following best WordPress practices from the get-go with your site, and it's really cacheable, it's not super heavy or dynamic, then you're already doing the right things, right? It makes them for a much, much easier process whenever you're preparing for a major event.
Thank you. That's all really good information to have. And then I have a question. So coming at this from a complete load test beginner, never having used any of these tools, with something like Apache JMeter, in the process of going through all of those steps and doing your testing, you mentioned like testing to see what your site can handle. How do these tools throw traffic at the site to test that? Like how are these tools throwing traffic at the site to test it when you're on, say, like a staging environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a variety of different methods of throwing traffic at a site, whether it's you're testing the production or the staging environment. And what a lot of these services do is they will actually assign, so something that JMeter does is they work with Google and AWS in order to spin up local or servers that they already have in the regions that you've defined, right? So you can say, hey, I would like to spin up an EC2 instance with AWS in Japan, and then a Google instance in Virginia. And I want traffic coming from both of those places to hit my site. So they use infrastructure providers as well. If someone is super nerdy and they're trying to be really resourceful and save money, they can always leverage open source tools like Taurus in order to run on their local machine. So you can actually generate traffic from your local machine to hit a site wherever it is. However, you you don't want your local machine to crash. So that could be the problem. And so there's a, it definitely gets a lot more into detail of like, how do you scale those load testing servers also to make sure they don't crash and they don't become the bottleneck, because that's not a problem that you would want to deal with, right? And so, yeah, so I would say, in a long kind of answer that, yeah, the load testing platforms use their own servers to test.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's super interesting. So they're actually throwing real traffic at your site. It's just controlled and coming from their own servers.
Yeah, pretty much. And the user scripts are, with all of the actions, are being executed by those servers. So yeah, they might not be human, but they're generating the same kind of requests that you might see during the real event itself.
Got it. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. It looks like we're done with questions. So thank you so much, Tony. Everybody stick around for our next presentation. We're going to have Kate Federow talking about how much does a hack cost. So stick around for that. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Peace. Cheers.